In this session, I want to talk to you about virtual reference strips. Previously, we talked about algorithms and that some of them require a reference strip, either a high-end reference strip or a high-end reference and a low-end reference to calibrate that nitrogen rate algorithm or equation. So what is a nitrogen rate or a reference strip? It's just a high rate of N applied in and across, through, over, or under each and every field. People often ask, how much should my reference strip have in it? Well, it should be a rate significantly higher than that standard farmer practice. Maybe you put 50 pounds out before, up until the time of side dressing your corn. And you just want to have more than that so that it is greener and more lush growth. So how and where? Well, the handheld sensors have made this easier, because if you get a cheap handheld sensor, you can go out and read that reference strip and then enter that number manually into your sprayer, so it doesn't have to be boom width anymore. So 10 to 100 feet wide and anywhere in the field that's representative. And you want that field to be, that strip to be long enough to be representative so it'll still be there when you come out. One example I always give is when I first started using sensors to manage nitrogen, I'd make my strips too small. I thought I could get away with a 25 or 50-foot reference strip, and I'm really bad at picking the spots for these things. So I normally would put it right where I would make entrance into the field with the sprayer, and without a doubt, that spot would be the area that got flooded out every year, and then my reference strip wouldn't be there because all the nitrogen denitrified off the top. So you just want to make sure you've got it in a representative area. Some people even say you should put multiple reference strips in the field and average them. The other key thing here is you do need a reference strip for most of these equations that represents days from planting. That's really the important part. So when you're planting corn, you need to be thinking ahead. That's what makes sensor-based management a little bit trickier, because you want those reference strips in every field is best, so you're representing that field condition. But if you can't do that practically, you want to have a reference strip that went out on corn that was planted the same day as the corn you're applying. So maybe you planted 2 fields on the same day. You would really, as long as they're the same variety, only need a reference strip in one of those fields, because you could go over and sense that reference strip the day you're side dressing that's in the other field that was planted the same day with the same variety and use it in the field you're side dressing today. As far as timing, that's going to be crop and environment specific. For example, in wheat, we're usually going to put that reference strip out at green up, whereas in corn, we're going to put it down before planting or at planting. We just want to make sure that area, we know it's sufficient in nitrogen when we go to side dress. So what is the virtual reference? People working on algorithms know that farmers hate the reference strip. They are a pain to manage. There's been a lot of research done, good research on virtual reference strips. The sensor is continually recording NDVI as you travel across the field. So what they've done is they take the top part and the bottom part of the NDVI range that they're getting from that field, and they're constantly informing that algorithm as they side dress more and more of the field, and they're using perhaps, let's say, the top 20% of the NDVI readings and the bottom 20% of the NDVI readings from that field, right? So they're getting the best looking and the worst looking part of the crop. But here's my problem with virtual reference strips. You have no idea why those areas of the field are ranked in the top and the bottom. Maybe it's soil type, but maybe it's not nitrogen availability. Maybe there's a pH issue or a phosphorus issue. So you're not getting nitrogen responsiveness. A high and N low reference area, like we showed in the Virginia Tech algorithm, helps to calibrate the sensor to those specific conditions in the hybrid, the planting date, in that current field. With a high N and a low reference area, you know the high N reference strip that you put the nitrogen out there, you know it's green and vigorous because it's sufficient in nitrogen. With a virtual strip, you're measuring relative yield potential, but you're not measuring nitrogen responsiveness. And that's a key difference if you understand the algorithm. If you're measuring yield potential, and we're saying that yield potential isn't the only part of nitrogen requirement, we need nitrogen responsiveness as well, then you've got to have that real high reference area, and the virtual is just not going to get you nitrogen responsiveness. And so we go back to that original graph that shows the nitrogen rate on the vertical axis and the NDVI on the horizontal axis. And it's the key part here is that YPN minus YPO is nitrogen responsiveness, not just yield potential across the field. And so if you're using this type of algorithm, you've got to have the reference strips. So if we go back to the previous example where we showed the lack of nitrogen response but in a high yield area, that occurred because of specific weather pattern and a historic swine manure application. In this field at Keedysville, we got 205 bushels per acre with 0 pounds per acre of nitrogen. A virtual reference would have never picked up on this lack of response, right? Because there's still an area of the field that's going to be greener and have a higher NDVI, and still an area in the field with lower NDVI. And the virtual reference will say, well, this is due to nitrogen, when really it was just field variability. So with the reference strips, we would have known we could have really cut our rates. Now, even with the reference rates, it wouldn't have cut the rate down to 0 because we have those constraints built in, but it would have certainly saved us a lot of fertilizer because it would have said, hey, there's no difference between the 0-end strip I put out and the high-end strip that I put out, so there's no responsiveness in this field, so I can really decrease my nitrogen rate on this specific field. The other example that we're all familiar with is drought years. In drought years, we don't get as much nitrogen response because we're just not producing the corn.